why does the brain look like that? I mean, like, it doesn't have to. If you look at birds, the bird brain is smooth. Or if you're an octopus, the brain is distributed throughout all 8 of the limbs. Somewhere around 2/3 or so of the brain is actually not in the, I guess, head of the octopus. And so, like, it doesn't have to be like that. So why is it like that? What possible value comes from a walnut-looking brain? It's a really interesting question to ask. And so to really help us understand this, we're going to be looking at one of our brand new physiology study units here on KenHub. Now, this study unit is all about the functional anatomy of the brain. If I go up here, you can see the functional anatomy of the cerebrum. So the anatomy is basically just saying, hey, like this part versus this part. The functional anatomy is like, okay, but why is that part, and what is it doing? And it's a really interesting way to approach your anatomy. Now, this is a premium feature, but this is part of our brand new physiology section that we just launched. We're so excited to show you. There's so much value here. So I just wanted to kind of sneak a peek and just show you how amazing these things can be. Now, we are going to be, to celebrate, offering a separate but equally awesome study unit down in the description below. You can go ahead and click on that. That's 100% free. You can check it out, see how amazing these things are. But with enough of that, what I want to talk about is just how the brain folds itself, right? So if you could unfold the brain, which you can't, but if you could, you see different numbers based on different texts. The number actually doesn't really matter all that much, but it's somewhere around like 2 to 3 square feet or something along those lines is what you're typically going to see, all just folded into your cranium. And so, like, again, like, birds do not have this. Birds have smooth brains. And so you might be wondering, okay, well, what's the difference? Because here's the interesting part. The reason why I brought up birds and an octopus is because they are highly intelligent creatures. In fact, like, they use tools, they solve problems. And so it's not as though there wasn't other options. It's just an interesting, divergence within just biology that our brain and mammalian brains went this way to exhibit that. And so, like, with birds, for example, like, if we go up here, it's kind of cool. I'm going to scan up here. You can see basically the different layers of what is called the cerebral cortex. There's going to be 6 different layers here, and these are all just different types of neurons. They do all sorts of really interesting things. But let's just understand this. Birds, their neurons are far more densely packed. Like, I'm talking like really densely packed, which is really cool because then you don't need to have as big of a brain to be able to do some really exciting things as you would if you had a different architecture. However, like, I want you to just look at this. Like, look at all the cross wiring that's going on between these neurons. So the more densely you pack it, that's going to start to become kind of problematic. I mean, there's only so much you can do. I want you to think of it like almost like a crowded extension cord space. Like, think like an outlet. Imagine you have all these cords just plugged in. It's all twisted and like, it starts to become impractical. And I mean, like, in that instance, it becomes dangerous. But I think you understand, like, there's a limitation based off of that density that you now have to navigate. All right, so which is a really important thing, because if we go back down to our brain and you look at it like this, there's more space. There's more space by doing this folded approach. So basically, you're kind of just like putting these creases, and then you have these raised areas, and then you have these sunken down areas. In fact, we have names for them. Right, so you can see, like, in this image here, we have these terms called gyrus, and then there's also going to be a sulcus. So if we look at this, like, the raised area that you're seeing, those are the gyri, or gyrus. And then the creases, those folds, are the sulci, or sulci. And what that does is, I mean, again, it's literally just allowing more surface area into a smaller amount of space. So we can still have a large amount of neurons, but we're folding them into really interesting areas. Now, something else that happens because of this folding is you get what are called functional areas of the brain. Right? So, like, your brain's not color-coded. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but, like, this right here is what we call the frontal lobe, and we're going to be seeing this in greater detail in a second. Your frontal lobe is not purple, right? It's not orange, yellow, green. That's just not how it is. But these are distinct areas. Right? They are based off of function, and they get even more specific than that. In fact, there's these little tiny areas that you may have heard of called Brodmann areas that get really, really detailed into how they work. But I just want to bring your awareness to one thing. Like, if we actually look really closely, you're going to notice that there is a sulcus separating these distinct areas. right? The sulci help to create regionality, like geographic regions on the brain, and then we find through some really interesting medical imaging, right? We can look at, say, like through an MRI, and we can see how much blood flow is going to an area of a brain during certain activities and thoughts and things of that nature. And what we can do is we can actually map out and say, oh, this area of the brain is responsible for this, and this area is responsible for that. And it's really fascinating to see that the folding wasn't just about saving space, it created functional regions of the brain. Right? Absolutely fascinating to consider. And so what I want to do is I actually want to come down here to this image, and what we're going to do is we're going to cycle through some of these areas. Now, I'm not going to be able to give a lot of information on all of them. We might even skip over some of them. My point is more so to just give you an idea as to how many different regions there are in the brain and how we can further subdivide them. And because this is probably not going to surprise anyone here, neurology is complicated, right? Neuroscience is a complicated area, but that is because there's just so much complexity. So enough of that. What you're seeing here, actually I'm going to enlarge in this. What you're seeing here is what we call the cerebrum. So the cerebrum actually translates to brain, and you can see this is a really large portion, right? For us as humans, this is the largest portion of our brain, which we could say the whole thing that's how we collectively call it the brain. But what you're also seeing that's not highlighted would be the brainstem and the cerebellum, and those are more ancient parts of what we would consider your brain. Now, so we have the cerebrum, and then we can start looking at the different lobes. And so this right here, like I mentioned earlier, is the frontal lobe. And as you can see, everything is not color-coded. It's far more like pinkish in color. But the frontal lobe, this is where a lot of really exciting stuff happens. And we're going to be able to dissect and divide it up and show you some of those different regions. But like just broadly speaking, I want you to understand the frontal lobe is not just this surface you see here. It's also what is deep to it. Right? Like I think you can probably imagine, like if you say like if you're cutting a fruit, right? If we think of like a peach or something like that, right? You have the peach skin, but then you're going to have the actual flesh of the peach underneath. And so the frontal lobe is going to incorporate all of the white matter, which is going to be myelinated axons, that is also going to be deep to the cerebral cortex. I know I'm dropping a lot of information here, but by the way, you can understand all of this if you go check out our study unit on all of this. My point is more so, there's depth to it. Right? This is not just a surface piece. This is like a chunk of the brain, and we call that entire thing the frontal lobe. Right? So then we have what's called the parietal lobe. Oh, by the way, and I should say, like the frontal lobe, I mean, I say it does a lot of things. It does a lot of things. This is the largest part of your brain. This is where, like you have rational decision making, morality, empathy, like motor control. I could go on and on. There is so much going on in this particular lobe. Now, if we go to the parietal lobe, this is where your body's starting to like understand sensations that are coming in, like temperature and touch, things of that nature, and it's going to be able to process that and put it all together. This is again what we call the parietal lobe. And then we have the temporal lobe. And the temporal lobe, again, and by the way, I'm doing a criminal simplification on all of these. It's like, I'm not even joking, like little tiny Brodmann areas, which are these little spots on these. People can devote like entire careers to those small areas. And so for me to just kind of sum it up like this is borderline criminal. But we could say that the temporal lobe is primarily for like auditory processing. So, like my voice coming out of your phone right now, you are going to be processing that and making sense of it inside of your temporal lobe. And then a lot of people understand this one kind of intuitively. Like for whatever reason, we've been told our entire lives that vision is in the back of our head. I mean, that's true. What I mean is, like, I don't know why we don't talk about other areas of the brain. It's just that we all kind of like from a young age are like, oh yeah, vision is in the back of my head. This is the occipital lobe, and this is where visual processing is going to occur. So the actual taking in of the information and then making sense of the information. And then we're going to see the insula. So the insular lobe is hidden. So what you can see here is we have these retractors that are just kind of peeling apart and lifting up and separating the temporal lobe, which would be down here from like the frontal and parietal lobe. And so the insula, this is where we're going to have the body's kind of like understanding of what's going on inside of itself. So you think like your heartbeat, for example, or whether or not you're nauseous. So things like that are going to be processed inside of the insular lobe. Now, then from there we're going to meet the limbic lobe. Now the limbic lobe is actually going to be, so it kind of depends on the texts, right? Like, so the limbic lobe is going to incorporate all sorts of different areas, because you can see that what it's doing is it's surrounding something called the corpus callosum and surrounding like the thalamus and other aspects of the limbic system. And the limbic system is a whole other thing that I would love to talk about sometime. But just understand, like, this incorporates several different lobes. And so this is where you're going to get kind of like, it's going to be helping you to understand emotions, I think is a really good way to say it, that are related to survival. Right? So you're talking about like fear, anxiety, those types of things. That is going to be heavily processed within the limbic lobe. Right? So then, from there, now we can start subdividing these areas. Now, again, you could argue that the limbic lobe was a subdivision, but now what we're doing is I want to actually start diving into some specific regions in here. And so this first one, this is what's called the primary motor cortex. So the primary motor cortex, this is part of that frontal lobe. And so if you remember me saying, the whole thing is responsible for a lot of things, but also motor control. So motor control is all about movement. Right, so the primary motor cortex is what is going to execute that movement. It's going to be working with another area that we're about to see, but just understand, like, this is where, like, right now, as I'm waving and doing all this kind of stuff, right, the execution of that, the decision to be like, let's do that, that is coming from my primary motor cortex. But then on the other side of it, this is where we have the primary somatosensory cortex. Now, I want to really quickly mention that there is a giant sulcus that is going down here. This is the central sulcus. It's literally separating. It's literally separating the primary somatosensory area or cortex from the primary motor cortex. Now, sometimes, again, depends on the text, depends on how you want to look at this. You could also call this the post-central gyrus, and then we could also call this one the pre-central gyrus. Right? Because remember, a gyrus is going to be the raised area, and then the sulcus is going to be that lowered, kind of like a valley type area. And so if we're looking at the gyrus in front of the central sulcus, well, that's the right? You see what I'm saying? It was all we're just saying is, are you post or are you pre-central? That is also a name for it. Now, the primary somatosensory cortex or area, this is actually going to be all about specifically like sensations that are coming in through your body, right? Like skin temperature, like your joint kinesthetic receptors, basically just saying like, hey, my body's moving, my body is feeling this, I'm poking this. Those types of things are going to be processed by that primary somatosensory cortex. All right, so then what we're going to get is the primary auditory area. So the primary auditory area, this is all about where sounds are coming in. All right, so we're not making sense of the sounds as much as it's just like, hey, I heard this pitch, I heard this frequency, I heard this amount of loudness. We're talking about like almost like raw data here is what we're going to be seeing in the primary auditory area. So then we go back to the occipital lobe, and this is where we meet the primary visual cortex. So the primary visual cortex, this is also another way we could say this is V1. So V1, this is again raw data, lines, edges, right? Like we're talking about like just strict, just visual information, just boom, right to the back of your head. And we're going to see that V1 is then going to actually be giving that information out so that your brain can start to make sense of those raw lines and edges and all that data that comes with it. But this is going to be that primary visual cortex. Right, so then we get the premotor or supplementary and the supplementary motor area. So there's a few things that are included in here. So if you remember, the primary motor cortex was all about execution, right? It's like, here's what we're doing, right? Like this is it, do it. This is more about the planning, right? Like it's going to actually be like deciding and working with different areas of your body to kind of figure out what should be happening. How are we going to do this? So this is, right, think of it as just the planning stage, right? The staging area for an actual executed movement before giving it off. And then what will happen is that primary motor cortex says, yes, this is what we want to do. All right, so then we get the frontal eye field. Now, the frontal eye field, this is voluntary eye movement. So it's and typically the way I always describe it is it's like short, snappy ones. Right, like for example, like I could do this. Like I could very slow, as slow as I can go. It's hard to really slowly move your eyes. But I mean, think about it like if you go into a room and you're not really sure what's in the room, like, you know, you're just checking out your surroundings, right? It's not like you're a spy and you're looking for the exits, although if you are, that's amazing. It's more so that you're just going to go in there and you're just kind of looking around, checking stuff. But a lot of this is your head's not moving, right? It's short, just like looking around type of movements. That is all going to be coming from that frontal eye field. All right, so then we get Broca's area. Now, Broca's area, this is all about actually like performing speech, right? It's like saying like we're talking about the decision to making speech, right? So, well, I mean, like it's going to work with the primary motor cortex to actually execute the movement, but this is about producing speech. This is like putting grammar together, syntax, putting the things together to actually be able to do it. So like right now, which is kind of crazy. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. I think about this all the time. It's part of my profession. Like I'll just be in the middle of teaching and in the back of my head, like I'm having like an out of body experience. I'm like, how am I saying this? Like the speed, the rate of it, it's absolutely nuts. How does any of this make sense? Well, I have Broca's area to, give the credit to. So Broca's area is helping to put all that together so then the primary motor cortex can actually execute that movement. Right? So then we're going to get to the somatosensory association area. So I think this might be the first association area we're going to see. The association areas are all about making sense of the raw data. So we had that primary somatosensory cortex. Okay, well, now when we go to the somatosensory association area, it's like, okay, well, what does it mean? Like, what do we do with this kind of stuff? Let's put it together and actually figure out the meaning behind it, which is obviously a very important thing, right? You need to be able to detect it, but you need to be able to make sense of it as well. All right, so then we're going to get the actual visual association area, right? So, I mean, this is where you're going to get like V2, V3, V4. These are different levels of your visual cortices, and this is where basically that primary visual cortex is going to hand off that raw data and you're starting to make sense of it, right? Like I like to think of it as rendering. I don't know if you have any experience in editing, but like for me, I'm always editing videos and thinking about rendering. It's like you're just refining it, right? You're scaling it. You're just making sure everything is actually going to look nice. That is basically what you're doing. You're making sense of that raw visual data. All right, so then we're getting the auditory association area. So the auditory association area does exactly what you think it does, right? So with that primary auditory area, the association area is going to make sense of those sounds. So like right now, my voice coming out of your phone is going to your primary auditory area, but then it's getting handed off to your association area, and that is making sense of it in terms of like how it's put together, right? It's not like we're going to see that there's another area that's really making sense of what you're hearing, but this is kind of like putting the information together, packaging it pretty nicely so that it can give it off to, we'll see it in a second, it's called Wernicke's area. All right. So then we get what's called the prefrontal association area, or what I would typically call the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex or association area, I could talk about this for hours. This is easily my favorite part of the brain. And my bet is it's probably yours too, for at least most people. This is the most recently evolved part of the brain. There is so much going on in this area. It is absolutely crazy. This is where you're going to get like rational decision making, morality, and empathy. You're able to put things together. This is what makes you human, right? You as a human being have the biggest prefrontal association area or cortex in the entire, out of all mammals, right? Like it is absolutely nuts how big this thing is in us. This is also the last region of the brain to fully mature, around 25 or so years old. Again, I could talk forever. There's so much going on in this area. Just think about it like this. This is the region that makes you human, right? Like the most humany human, right? Think about what it is to be human. That's it, right? This is it. All right. So then we're going to hit the parieto-temporal occipital association area. And so this is a big one. And what it's basically doing is it's working within 3 different lobes and kind of just putting all the information together. So you get the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, and then the parietal lobe, and it's just kind of putting all this information together. So we're talking about like sensory information on the skin, for example, sound, as well as vision, and just kind of putting it together and making sense of what you're seeing, hearing, and feeling, right? So it's kind of just meshing it all together. And then we do get Wernicke's area. So Wernicke's area is going to be all about understanding speech, right? So like right now, again, the voice went to the phone, went to your primary auditory area, then to the auditory association area. Then it gets handed off to Wernicke's area, and Wernicke's area is where it's putting it all together and really understanding what is going on with it. What does it mean? What am I really saying? And it's just kind of like making sense of just, again, what you're hearing. So it's kind of interesting because if you look at like brain injuries, someone could be injured in either Broca's area or Wernicke's area, and they're going to have different manifestations. One of them would develop speech problems, and the other one would develop issues actually understanding speech. So really interesting how that works out. All right, so then we're going to get the limbic association area. And the limbic association area is going to work with the limbic system to kind of put all the stuff together. So we're talking, because the limbic system is going to include things like hippocampus, the amygdala, but also like raw emotions and like survival type based emotions. Again, it's going to work very closely with that limbic lobe, and this is all to just kind of make sense of a lot of that information, that raw data that's coming in around emotions and memory and how you kind of process all that information. And that is it, right? That is, I mean, it's, there's a lot to go through with that, but I think you can just see how amazing all of this is. And again, I've scratched the surface of the surface of the surface of this. Again, who would have ever thought that the brain is as complex as it actually is? Now, as a reminder, this is part of a brand new physiology section. There's so much more to this. This is a premium feature here on KenHub, but we strongly encourage you to check it out. Again, to celebrate, we've gone ahead and left. It's a separate study unit than the one you're looking at here, but we've left a free, 100% free study unit for you to check out down in the description below. Please do. See how amazing these things are. We put a lot of effort into it. I think you are going to be blown away by everything that comes with it. But while you're down there, we would really appreciate it if you went ahead and liked this video, left us a comment, let us know what you think about these types of videos, and maybe possibly what you want us to cover in the future. But thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time.